The cops tried to frame the quiet janitor, not knowing he was the most famous civil rights lawyer of the 90s. He never raised his voice, not even when they slammed him against the wall. The mop in his hand dropped with a dull thud, like dignity being stripped in real time. It was supposed to be another quiet evening shift at Eastbrook High. The halls were empty, lockers locked, the soft hum of the overhead lights bouncing off polished floors. Isaiah Monroe moved slowly, a rhythm he'd earned with age and patience. At 71, he worked as the night janitor, a figure barely noticed, mostly ignored. And that's how he preferred it. What most didn't know, what nobody knew anymore, was that Isaiah once stood before the Supreme Court, arguing cases that shook the nation. He once walked beside Thurgood Marshall. He once got spat on in Alabama and honored in Harlem in the same week. But now, he wiped gum off floors and refilled paper towels. Somewhere along the way, silence had become his sanctuary. Until that Tuesday night. It started with a missing iPad. The police were called. And just like that, Isaiah became suspicious. Black male. Late 60s or 70s. Works here. Might be hiding something. That's what the officer said into his radio as he eyed Isaiah's closet, where only cleaning supplies lived. The teacher who reported the missing device stood behind the cop with arms crossed, looking nervous but entertained. She was new, young, and white. "I told you I haven't seen anything," Isaiah said calmly. "Feel free to look." The officer, Officer Rourke, was barely 30. Muscular, buzz-cut, badge gleaming with authority. He gave Isaiah a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, old man." And just like that, the dignity Isaiah carried like a cloak his whole life was challenged by a boy too young to know history and too proud to learn. Officer Rourke pushed open the janitor's closet door. Bleach. Brooms. A radio playing faint jazz. No iPad. No mystery. But that didn't matter. What mattered was control. "We'll need to take you in for questioning," Rourke said. Isaiah blinked. "Questioning for what?" "You're the only one here. And you fit the profile." "The profile," Isaiah repeated, his voice even. "Of an elderly janitor with a mop in his hand? Step outside. Now." Isaiah looked at the teacher, hoping for reason. But she looked away. By the time they walked him through the school's front doors, the backup had arrived. 3 more officers. 1 holding cuffs. 1 with a hand on his taser. They treated Isaiah like a suspect, not a man. And certainly not a man who once fought for the rights they claimed to uphold. He didn't resist. Didn't speak. He let the cold metal lock around his wrists. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the old rage stir, but he buried it. Not yet. At the station, they searched his belongings. Wallet, keys, a yellowed photo of his wife who passed 6 years ago. And a clipping from an old newspaper tucked deep in the folds of his wallet, so aged the words had faded. "Isaiah Monroe wins landmark housing case," one of the younger cops read aloud, frowning. Rourke snatched it from him and tossed it aside. They left him alone in the holding room for hours. No water. No phone call. He sat with his hands folded, breathing through his nose. The room smelled like sweat and mildew and broken spirits. But Isaiah had known worse. He'd once been arrested in Jackson, Mississippi, for standing on the wrong side of a lunch counter. That day, he was 25 and fearless. Now, he was 71 and tired but no less full of truth. Detective Anna Morales came on shift at 6 a.m. A Latina in her 40s, sharp as a whip and twice as fast. She glanced through the night reports with her coffee and paused at Isaiah's name. She squinted. She'd heard that name before. She pulled the booking photo. The image of an old black man, tired but composed, stared back at her. Something felt wrong. She clicked her keyboard. typed in Isaiah Monroe and civil rights just to be sure. The screen exploded with history. NAACP 1992 Voting Rights Act Challenge. The Malcolm Green housing case. She gasped. She rushed to the holding room. He looked up when she entered. No expression. Just those heavy, watchful eyes. Mr. Monroe, she said, voice low. You're the Isaiah Monroe, aren't you? He tilted his head. That depends on who's asking. I'm Detective Morales. And I think there's been a terrible mistake. He gave a dry chuckle. Yes. That much is obvious. She sat down across from him. Why didn't you say anything? I didn't think I needed to. She winced. Within the hour, Morales had the body cam footage from Rourke's patrol. She reviewed the footage, saw how he escalated, how he mocked, how he dismissed Isaiah's cooperation. She saw racism in real time. Morales stormed into the captain's office, slamming the file down. We've got a problem. By 10 a.m., Isaiah was quietly released. No apology. Just a clipboard shoved at him and a mumble about protocol. But Morales walked him out personally. Can I offer you a ride home? She asked. I'll walk, he said. The sun was up. The sky clean and blue. But Isaiah didn't feel free. He felt bruised. Again. He returned to the school later that afternoon. The principal, a middle-aged man with glasses and no spine, mumbled about miscommunication and how can we make this right. Isaiah didn't reply. He just picked up his mop and walked the halls. That evening, something remarkable happened. An email. A former student named Marcus Ellison. Now a lawyer in Chicago. Mr. Monroe, it read, I don't know if you remember me. But you changed my life. When I was in 8th grade, I stayed behind to talk with you while you mopped the floor. You told me stories about fighting for justice, and you made me believe I could make a difference. I never forgot that. If there's anything I can do to help you now, say the word. Isaiah stared at the screen a long time. He wrote back one sentence, tell the world what happened. And Marcus did. The story broke within 48 hours. Civil rights legend detained over missing iPad. Photos of Isaiah in cuffs ran on major networks. Protests sparked across the city. Students at Eastbrook staged a walkout. Alumni wrote letters. Lawyers called. And Officer Rourke? Suspended. Then investigated. Then gone. But Isaiah didn't want revenge. He wanted change. He spoke at a press conference a week later, standing behind a simple wooden podium in front of the courthouse. I am not a hero, he said. I'm a janitor. And I'm a man who once believed in the power of justice. A pause. But justice doesn't live in titles. It lives in how we treat people when no one is watching. He looked out at the cameras, the microphones, the rows of young faces. If they can frame me, he said, they can frame anyone. It went viral. Within days, he was invited to speak on national platforms. A university offered him an honorary doctorate. A foundation was named in his honor. But Isaiah? He still went back to Eastbrook. Still swept those halls. Still nodded to students and smiled when they waved. Only now, they knew. The quiet janitor was never just a janitor. He was history walking in slow steps. And his silence? It was never weakness. It was a roar waiting to be heard. Detective Anna Morales couldn't sleep that night. She kept replaying the footage of Isaiah's arrest in her head, the way Officer Rourke had spoken to him like he was disposable. She'd seen disrespect before, but this felt deeper. More sinister. This man had once defended people like her parents, immigrants from Guatemala who wouldn't have had a voice in the 90s without lawyers like Isaiah Monroe. She opened her laptop and began digging. Articles. Court records. Interviews. Photos of a younger Isaiah standing with leaders, marching in Selma anniversaries, speaking to Congress. The stories didn't match the man she saw cleaning bathrooms. Why was someone like him pushing a mop? She typed a message to a journalist she knew at the Atlanta Times. Subject: You're gonna want this. By morning, Isaiah's name had begun to trend in local feeds. The article headline read, "Legend Among Us, Civil Rights Giant Wrongfully Detained." And suddenly, people started asking questions. At the school, students buzzed in the hallways. Wait, Mr. Monroe was a lawyer? No way. Like, for real? He defended Supreme Court cases? That guy? Yo, that's wild. The young teacher who had originally reported the iPad missing, Miss Kelsey Hardwick, found herself suddenly the object of side eyes and whispers. She tried to brush it off, but the guilt gnawed at her. Especially after she saw the picture. A black and white photo of Isaiah in 1994, standing beside Coretta Scott King, arms linked. Isaiah, meanwhile, kept silent. Until Thursday afternoon. He was in the teacher's lounge, eating his usual peanut butter sandwich, when Principal Renner came in with 2 members of the school board. Mr. Monroe, Renner began, looking sheepish. We owe you a tremendous apology. Isaiah looked up, chewed, then wiped his mouth. Is that all? One of the board members stepped forward, a balding white man with a sweaty forehead. We'd like to publicly honor you at this Saturday's school assembly. We believe it's the least we can do. Isaiah stared at him a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fine. But I'll say what I want. Of course, the man stammered. Saturday came. The auditorium was packed. Students, parents, reporters. Isaiah walked slowly to the podium, no suit, no pretense. Just his janitor's uniform and that same calm presence. I wasn't always a janitor, he began, his voice even. But I've always cleaned up messes. Even when they weren't mine. The room stilled. He looked out at the students. You don't know me. Most of you walked by me without ever seeing me. That's okay. I chose that. But you should know I once stood in front of people who believed I didn't belong. And I proved them wrong. Not with anger. With evidence. With law. With dignity. A beat. Dignity is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And uniform does not equal value. The students applauded. The parents stood. But Isaiah didn't soak in the moment. He stepped down and walked out the side door before anyone could stop him. The next day, the New York Times called. Then the Washington Post. Then the Smithsonian. Everyone wanted to talk to the janitor who changed America and then quietly disappeared. But Isaiah refused most interviews. He did, however, agree to one sit-down on one condition. It had to be with Marcus Ellison, the student who had become a lawyer because of him. They met in a small studio set up in Marcus's Chicago office. 2 chairs. 2 glasses of water. A single camera. Marcus started softly. Why did you leave the law, Mr. Monroe? Isaiah sighed. After my wife died, I had nothing left to argue for. My voice belonged to both of us. When she went, so did it. And now? He looked at Marcus. Now I see I gave up too soon. The interview was aired on PBS. Clips went viral. People who had once sat in courtrooms listening to Isaiah's booming voice now saw the quiet janitor as he was older, humbler, but no less powerful. Protests turned to policy discussions. The Georgia Police Department came under review. Officer Rourke was stripped of his badge and sued by civil rights groups. But Isaiah didn't seek revenge. He visited local schools, speaking to students about dignity, justice, and the danger of silent injustice. At one school, a young girl raised her hand. "Mr. Monroe, are you angry?" Isaiah smiled. "I was. But now? I'm awake." That night, he returned to his apartment, the same one he had lived in since 1986. He pulled out a cardboard box from under the bed. Inside were old legal pads, notes from trials, letters from clients, and one envelope labeled unfinished. He opened it. Inside was a speech. One he had meant to give after his final court win. He read it aloud to himself. "Freedom is not a guarantee. It is a discipline. It requires courage from the quiet and action from the afraid." He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. The next morning, Isaiah showed up at the Eastbrook Community Center. "Looking for volunteers?" he asked. The director looked up, stunned. Yes. Always. But Mr. Monroe, you. I've got some floors to mop. And maybe a few minds to change." She smiled. And he got to work. 3 months after the school assembly, Eastbrook High had changed. Not just on paper, but in spirit. Students who once ignored Isaiah now nodded when they saw him. Teachers stopped and talked. Someone even started a hallway mural of prominent civil rights leaders and placed Isaiah's image right in the center. He hated it. Not because he didn't appreciate the gesture, but because he never wanted to be remembered as a martyr. He wanted to be remembered as a man who tried, who failed, and who kept trying again. Still, he knew something was coming. A storm. And it came quietly. An anonymous complaint filed with the school district claimed Isaiah was a distraction and disrupting normal educational processes. Behind closed doors, Principal Renner told him, "They want you to step down. Retire." Gracefully, they said. Isaiah blinked slowly. "You mean now that the school is getting attention, they want the attention to go away?" "I'm sorry, Isaiah. My hands are tied." He stood up. "Your hands aren't tied. You're just scared to move them." He walked out, leaving behind the mop, the ID badge, and his keys. But not his dignity. The next morning, the mural of Isaiah was covered in a black tarp. The morning after that, students ripped the tarp off. Someone had written in bold letters across the wall, "You can erase paint, not legacy." It sparked a firestorm. Local students organized protests. 1 week later, a citywide youth rally was held at the same high school. The gym was packed. News cameras hovered like flies. And there, walking down the aisle, was Isaiah Monroe. He hadn't been invited. He didn't need to be. As he stepped on stage, the crowd went silent. He didn't take the podium. He just looked at them all. "You don't need me," he said quietly. "That's the point. You never did." "But we want you," a student shouted. Isaiah smiled. "Then prove it." Not with applause. With action. He held up a piece of paper. It was a petition, a call for Eastbrook to create a student-led civil rights advisory council, with real authority to influence school policies and curriculum. A group that would outlive him, outlive any one moment. The students signed. Hundreds. Within days, it was approved by the school board under pressure from a growing public movement now known as the Monroe Moment. That night, Isaiah returned home to find a letter slipped under his door. It was handwritten, in careful penmanship. "Dear Mr. Monroe, I'm sorry. For not speaking up when they accused you. For not recognizing you. But because of you, I now want to become a civil rights attorney. Thank you. Kelsey Hardwick." He folded the letter and added it to the box under his bed. Weeks turned to months. Isaiah began speaking more, traveling the country. Not on television shows or book tours, but in church basements, public libraries, union halls, places the cameras forgot. He told his story not to be celebrated, but to remind people the fight isn't over. Just hidden under different names. He stood at bus stops in poor black neighborhoods where police cruisers made slow loops like sharks. He talked to immigrants who feared ICE more than illness. He visited prisons, schools, shelters. At every stop, he asked one question: who do you see that nobody sees? In Baltimore, a young girl answered, my uncle. He works 2 jobs and still sleeps on the floor. In Jackson, a boy said, the janitor in our building. He's deaf. No one talks to him. In Fresno, a woman whispered, me. Isaiah wrote down every answer. He called it his invisible ledger. It grew thicker with each passing day. Then, during a winter trip to Chicago, Isaiah collapsed in the snow outside a youth center. The cold hit harder than expected. His knees buckled. A group of teens rushed to help. At the hospital, a nurse told him, your heart's tired. You need to rest. But Isaiah just laughed softly. Rest is for the retired. I've still got things to say. The incident made headlines. The janitor who wouldn't quit. A documentary team reached out. They wanted to film him, retrace his life, his impact. He agreed, but only if the story wasn't about him. Make it about the people I met, he said. Make it about the ones they tried to erase. In the final scene, Isaiah sits in a dimly lit room, surrounded by photographs not of himself, but of those from his ledger. A mother feeding her child in a shelter. A black trans man smiling in a mirror. A farm worker asleep in the bed of a truck. A young activist in a hijab handing out water bottles at a protest. As the camera zooms in, Isaiah says, my story doesn't end with me. It never did. He passed away quietly in his sleep 6 months later. There was no national funeral. No televised eulogy. But in cities across the country, murals appeared. In classrooms, students read his story alongside Martin Luther King Jr. In law schools, his early cases were cited again. And in Eastbrook High School, the advisory council he helped create passed a new initiative. Every graduating senior would complete a community project that addressed injustice in their neighborhood. They named the requirement the Monroe Mandate. At graduation that year, Kelsey Hardwick took the stage, now a third-year law student, and read aloud his favorite quote. Dignity is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. She paused. And now, because of him, we refuse to be silent ever again. Applause thundered through the auditorium. But outside, just beyond the noise, a janitor quietly swept the hallway. He looked up at Isaiah's mural. And smiled. Because legacy is not carved in stone. It is carried in footsteps.